So, in approaching the conspiracy theory topic as a theme, it comes to my attention that it's such a varied and broad and extensive, just vast, you know, item of inquiry to try and cover that there's just so much involved in it. It is actually exceptionally interesting, and I mean, not all conspiracy theories are wacky nonsense. It is actually one of the bigger conspiracies that is, in fact, transpiring, that's very real, to kind of discredit the entirety of the idea altogether. What one of the biggest conspiracies that is actually happening is this play on the very ideology of it, that the people who are in fact hoping to hide certain things from you, and it does exist. There are people out there, secret societies, people trying to hide things, red flag events. These are realities. It's and the mainstream media is busting their asses to just discredit the very concept of it in general. That anybody who speaks to this, anybody who even voices an opinion concerning, the potentiality of there being a conspiracy transpiring, they're immediately labeled wackos, crackpots, crazies. And conspiracy theory, the very term of it, the very phrase itself is discredited in and of itself at its root. And if you don't see that as being a conspiracy, then it's just the fact of the matter is you're blinded. I mean, it's we were given this as, as a right and a responsibility when the American colonies were, or when the Americas were colonized. When the United States of America was born, before we were the United States of America, we were given this as both a right and a responsibility to watch our governing factors, to examine and observe their activities, and to out them if they are hiding things that are of a detriment to us as a society. And it's come to the point now where that, you know, that that action, watching your government and pointing out factors wherein it seems as though they may be acting against us as a society, or doing us a disservice in general, pointing that out has now become the wrong thing to do. That you are pegged as a conspiracy theorist if you even suggest that there may be a conspiracy happening. And that, in and of itself, is probably the biggest conspiracy that is transpiring. It's kind of like this enormous catch 22. However, that's not precisely the conspiracy theory that I was hoping to speak to in this video. Um, there is a kind of a conspiracy sort of notion happening that is one of the catalyst events that we need to deal with. The imperative needs to be dealing with directly. And that is involved, this conspiracy notion is involving the LGBT community, as I mentioned before, and particularly the transgender movement. And it's working at the root of it is working in the field of the pornographic industry. And basically there are two sides to this as usual. One side is looking to promote the transgender community as, an item of a sexualized item, yeah, like a sex object. And that's obviously, we're not going to promote that, but who doesn't? I mean, every sex is pegged as a sex object in the pornographic industry. That's their job. It's what they do. It's not news. It's no different than anything else. And in fact, with the transgender aspect, or the transgender community in this regard, they're actually aiding them in a kind of sort of way. They're normalizing them and establishing them as a kind of a third sex. However, the other side of this, that there are certain people, and these are not transgender people, these are uh, heterosexual people, essentially, which obviously transgender people are heterosexual in a sense. It's difficult to talk to to speak to these topics in that manner, and the phraseology, the terminology, and the verbiage is going to get scrambled, especially considering that people in the LGBT community have this kind of uh, this habit and this, I don't know what to call it, they this obsession, really, it seems, with verbiage and with terminology that they like to seemingly they enjoy being offended. They like to make things offensive. They like to take the words that we've used for ages and ages and suddenly determine them to be in some way offensive to them as a community because of their sexual orientation. That, of course, we don't promote. I'm not going to stand for it. None of you should have to. The words that we've used, they mean what they mean. They speak for themselves. You don't get to go around changing the meaning of words to suit your sexual preferences. And you certainly don't get to accuse people of being offenders because you've decided to take offense to something that is, in fact, not in any way offensive whatsoever. But that's not what we're talking about. This organization, as it were, working in the pornographic industry, is, in fact, operating in such a way as to make an attempt at placing the transgender community in a position where they're not only sex objects, but they're sex objects that are to be abused, that they are objects of sexual abuse. And this, can come across seemingly consensual, I suppose you could say, non-consequential, not really derogatory, where it comes to the S&M, communities, the what are they called? The BDSM communities, the people who are into that sort of sexual fetish, where it's violent sexual fetishes. It can be considered simply common to them. That's the way that they handle things, and they like it, and that's the way that they do things. It's perfectly consensual, right? No problem there. However, there is a problem because these people are not promoting simple BDSM, consensual violent sexual fetishes. These people, where this leads, where we can see this leading, is to, people itemizing the transgender community as being these objects of abuse and treating them as such. And where this could lead is to transgender people as a community being openly abused in the public and just carelessly, violently offended and abused and victimized openly, and this being regarded as commonplace and normal and okay somehow in the eyes of society. And sure, that might come across as being absurd right now to you, for me to say that at some point we might wind up with people, openly victimizing transgender people simply for their sexual orientation, and it being accepted by the community at large. That might seem ridiculous to you now, but many of the things that are commonplace right now would have seemed totally absurd to you 10 years ago. It did to me, and now it's just outrageous, an epidemic of outrageous proportions. Some of the things that are transpiring right in front of your face, that are commonplace to you, that are accepted, that they're so simply, they're so acceptable and commonplace now that you don't even see them happening. Like it thing, very offensive, flagrant discourses and offenses and derogatory activities and even derogatory communities existing that are just invisible to you because they've become simple and commonplace and perfectly accepted by society. You, anything can happen. The stupidity of people and their ability to accept stupid, ridiculous, and absurdly um, derogatory and offensive things is just, it's limitless. The stupidity of the human entity is limitless, and their ability, their, it seems the innate coping mechanism of the human entity to accept something that is unacceptable for the sake of subsisting, it's limitless, it's boundless, and it can get to that point. And this is something that needs to be addressed directly and handled appropriately. So here we've covered, or we've at least approached two, uh, not entirely separate, but two seemingly isolated conspiracy notions that are in fact happening right in front of you and are not, you like, you can't, they're irrefutable. You can't say it's a nonsense conspiracy theory. It's very obviously happening. So there you have it on that end. But the very concept, or the notion of conspiracy theorists being, you know, debunked, as it were, that anybody who raises the notion of there being an existing conspiracy transpiring is immediately dismissed as craziness. That's a big deal, because your voice, your power to intercede where you are being abused, where we are being abused as a society, our ability to step up, to voice our opinions, and to intercede where we are being offended by our governing factors, our governing factions, is has been stolen from us, and it's being stolen. You know, it's like the rug being swept right out from under you, and you're not even noticing it happening because you're just totally fucking, you're misdirected. You know, you're being distracted from it, while your right and your responsibility to govern your government is being stolen from you. So I guess the point of the video, really, ultimately, the moral of the story is fucking pay attention, people. That's all. Hila Salai. Deva Yuni Siari Namaste.